What's up, guys? Here in the downtown part of Guangzhou, and just stoked to be outside. The last 3 weeks have been really cold and polluted, so it's nice to have some warm weather. There's a lot of people out enjoying the weather as well. So today I'm going to be meeting up with a good friend of mine, Rico, and we're going to be talking about his entrepreneurship journey, and so you guys can get a little different perspective. I know you've already heard my story. So I'm going to go meet up with Rico now, and I'll bring you guys along. Let's go. Alright guys, I'm here with Rico. He is the owner and operator of SourceFind Asia. As I've been talking to you guys recently about different entrepreneurship things and topics, I wanted to also share the stories of other entrepreneurs who are doing their thing. So first off, I'm just going to let Rico introduce himself and what he's doing out here.
Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Rico Ngoma. I'm, as Harrison mentioned, I'm the CEO of SourceFind Asia. This is my office. And also I have a podcast called the Made in China podcast. We also have a YouTube channel called SourceFind Asia. I'm sure Harrison will be on the YouTube channel soon. Basically I moved to China in September 2014. Started my manufacturing consulting company about a year after that. And yeah, that's the rest is history. But I'm not sure if I should jump into the whole story right now.
Yeah, we're gonna get into some of the details. I don't want this.
Most important fact is I just came back from the gym drinking a protein shake, getting freaking jacked, bro.
Guys. So one of the things that I wanted to focus on in this video and like some of the videos that I'm coming out with are like the transitional period between like what you were doing before entrepreneurship and then the process leading up to that and then like what you're doing now. So let's take it back to before China and maybe just a little bit about like your history and when you first got interested in entrepreneurship and why that was like the lifestyle that you wanted to live.
I guess I'd have to take it back to I was born in Zambia, Southern Africa, and my dad was an entrepreneur. At least, like, it's interesting because he started his business like much later on in life, like when he was like in his late 30s. But when I was born, like I already saw him as like a business person. So there was that, and then my mom's also an entrepreneur. She had 3-4 clothing stores. She's changed into hardware now, but she was sourcing from China. So like I grew up with seeing her travel to Dubai, to Thailand, to Turkey, to China and Hong Kong, mainland China and Hong Kong, to source product. And the first time I came to China first time I went to Hong Kong was in 1999 or 2000. She did a little bit of work, but it was a vacation. And then I came again in 2008 when I was 16, and we went to Hong Kong, and we also came, that was the first time I came to Guangzhou, and we were like in the markets, we were in the streets, you know what I'm saying? We were in these streets, and it was like, I was a brat, man. Like I've talked about it on one podcast I did, but I was a brat. Like I didn't care about being in China. I was like, let's go back to Hong Kong. We were going to Thailand afterwards. I was like, I want to buy video games. Like I was just like, I was not into it. And
like
also,
any other kid,
yeah, and also like China at that time, like Guangzhou was not super modern. It was a big city, but it was like old,
like
real China, and I was like, I just wasn't into it. But I think inherently something subconscious was planted in my brain, like, okay, if you want to produce product, this is where you go, right? Mm-hmm. And then cut to me being in college. Again, I've always been interested in entrepreneurship from that age because of my parents. And I was in college and I was going into my last year, and I was just like, man, like, what am I gonna do? I don't want to work for somebody. I had part-time jobs that say, I was like, am I really just gonna go into like banking for for 3 years and then figure out entrepreneurship afterwards? And I came across a YouTube channel called The Elevator Life. It was Tim and Nick. Now it's called Enter China. And they had like 100 plus videos at the time of just their experiences coming to China as like 20-something-year-old, early 20s guys straight out of university, nothing to lose, making mistakes, learning as they go, making connections. And there was just that thing where I resonated with them as people because they were very relatable and they reminded me of myself. And then the second thing was being like, oh, these guys are doing like what my mom did. Like I could do this. Mm-hmm. Maybe I could take over my mom's business. That was what I was thinking about. And then I was like, fuck, this is the easiest way for me to get started in entrepreneurship. This is the place with the most opportunities right now. Doing it in North America it's obviously possible because there's new businesses coming up all the time, but the opportunities are way less, they're way more limited, right. And it's way more competitive.
Yeah,
you know,
it's a pretty big. It's a pretty big barrier to entry. I think, like, just the step to make the decision to come out here and like basically start your life over. Yep. I think is a pretty big barrier to entry that a lot of people, they're not going to do that. So it's like making that decision already gives you a huge leg up. But let's get even more detailed, like as far as the time frame. Like where in your college career did you decide, or like
the single moment?
Basically, yeah. Like what was your major? What kind of job did you have in college? Like let's like do this specific lead up to when you were like, holy crap, I'm gonna move to China. Like this is it.
Okay. My first job, most of my jobs were sales. Actually, all of them were sales. I think. Yeah, all of them were sales. So my first job was like working in a bookstore at college. I studied business administration management at Seneca in Toronto. And so I went from the bookstore, then the only job that I technically, you couldn't call it sales, but it was sales. I was a model at Abercrombie and Fitch.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, I know what it is. I was a model.
You didn't have your shirt off standing outside, did you?
No, luckily I didn't. Like, I was working inside. But the reason why they call you a model is because they basically take pictures of you. So they only hire attractive people. You know what I'm saying?
Really.
So they take pictures of you at the beginning of each season in the new line.
Yeah.
And the fact that they call you a model means that they can use your pictures in the store, in the catalogs, and not pay you. They're paying you because you're working there.
So it's a little loophole.
It's a little loophole. Everybody that worked there was like 16, 17. I was 18. It was like they're taking advantage of people.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's neither there or there. So I worked at Abercrombie. Then I started selling suits. That's kind of where I learned how to dress, really. And then after that, I went from the suits thing. Oh, in between that, I worked at a call center. Worst job I've ever had. I was there for like a month and a half. I was like, I can't do this. I remember. Do you want me to tell a specific story about the call center?
Like sometimes the moments where you're doing like the shittiest job is like when you're really thinking about what you do want to do.
Exactly. So I remember this moment. Actually, it informs the way I am as a manager now.
For sure.
I remember this moment at the call center where I was just like, I was exhausted. I was just like, what am I doing? Like, they give you like a call sheet of 1,000 names, and you're just calling, and there's a timer in between each call. And you're allowed to take a bathroom break, but even that's timed to like 2 minutes or something.
Wow.
So I took a bathroom break. I came back, and I'm like, I'm just there. And then I got a little buzz in my ear, like, hey, Rico, what's going on? You okay there? And I'm like, yeah, it's been 2.5 minutes since you made your last call. Just checking in on you. And I was like, fuck.
Damn.
I have to get back
That's
to
so
it.
intense.
Yeah, so I mean, they know. They know they have the statistic to say, like, if one person makes X amount of calls per hour, that translates to X amount of sales. So it's like it's a farm, right?
Numbers game.
Yeah, I mean, there was like 100 of us in that call center. It was just like,
that's crazy.
Anyways, but so I did the call center thing, quit after a month and a half, started selling suits, loved that job. That was the first time I had a boss that kind of told me like, hey, you know what, like you have a lot of potential. I could see you rising up the ranks and all that stuff, and that was cool. But I worked there for a year, got bored. Then I switched over to selling women's clothing, which was just a nice change up. First of all, it was nice to be surrounded by women all day, but But it was also cool because I learned like a completely different, like I was selling to a completely different demographic. I went from selling suits to men to selling only to women. And then having to adapt to that. And again, that was probably the best boss. Well, besides my last job, that was probably one of the best bosses that I had, because the way she managed was to, instead of telling you exactly what to do if you had a question, she would ask you to think and come up with your own suggestion. And 8 or 9 times out of 10, my suggestions she would accept, and she'd let me try it, and then I start to gain confidence in myself as a creative person, and, you know, problem solving and stuff like that. And then after that, I worked at that place. I sold furniture, like high-end, ridiculous boutique furniture on a hipster street called Queen Street in Toronto, and it was just like I hated that. I didn't like what I was selling. I was selling like glass jars that were handcrafted in Japan for like $3,000, and this dude walks in with a mustache, and he's like, "Oh, this was crafted in Kyoto, right?" I'm like, I was like, get out, get out, I need to get out of here. So I was like, around the time when I was like, man, like, I don't want to work for anybody. I was like, this is just not working. Like I was changing jobs so frequently, even when I had bosses that I liked, even when I was in a job that I enjoyed, I just was like, the progression was so slow. Like working in the suits place and then the women's clothing store, I could see like, okay, I could see what my trajectory was. But I'm looking at my manager who's in her late 30s, and she's managing this store, and I'm like, this is not where I want to be in my late 30s, you know. And I was
that's like, just real quick, that's interesting you say that, because like that's exactly what I thought when I was in my jobs. Like I could see the trajectory, and it's just like I was looking at that, and I was like, that's not what I want to be doing.
Yeah, exactly.
In 10, 15 years, like of course they're making more money, or like, you know, they're more successful in their career, but ultimately didn't align with what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and I'm like, it's like either I work in a corporation and try to rise up the ranks, or I try to start a company, but it's very expensive to start a company in North. Like you have to borrow money for startup capital. So it was like, I was racking my brain, and I think I was just going through a bunch of entrepreneurship vlog. Oh yeah, and there was an entrepreneurship thread on some website that I was on, a forum that I was on, and that thread led me to Enter China, or Elevator Life at the time. And my last job was, I was working at a startup. Actually, I was working for one of my closest friends, and that was awesome because, again, I was doing sales, but working in a startup, I was able to sort of experiment with my ideas. It was kind of like I was running my own company without the risk of actually running my own company. So I would come into work every day, and I'd be listening to some podcast, whether it was like I Love Marketing or Tropical MBA or whatever. It was Tim Ferriss's podcast, and I'll come in and be like, guys, I was listening to this podcast today, and we should try this. And then they'll be like, yeah, try it. I'll be like, yeah, this is awesome. Give me your credit card. So yeah, and then that was my last job before I came down. But leading up to the moment, I think it was when I was working at the furniture place. Yeah. And I was just kind of like reading the forum and hearing all these dudes have amazing stories about moving to Asia, and just like, oh man, like I wish I could do this. And then coming across that thread where the guys talked about Guangzhou, talked about the elevator life, and then watching the elevator life, that was the moment I was like, okay, I'm gonna move to China. This is my opportunity, with them explaining how the cost of living is so much lower, being able to teach English and make, $3,000-$4,000 a month with living expenses of about $1,000 to $1,500 a month. I was like, this is the way.
Yeah. Okay, so you quit your job, and then you finally take the dive, buy a ticket, and you arrive to Guangzhou. What are your first impressions when you get here?
First impressions of Guangzhou, I was surprised at the development, because like I said, I'd first been to Guangzhou in 2008, and now this is 2014, so we're talking like 6 years later. Mm-hmm. And where we are right now, like this office, if we were to, I'm not sure if Harrison's going to pan around, but like the office buildings around us, like this general area, Tianhe, there was nothing here before. It was just like a village. Like these buildings down from this view, those are the remnants of how this place used to look. So like for me to see that development, I was like, whoa, like China, like I'd been watching all these videos with the guys talking about how quickly China is developing, but then to actually see it firsthand, to see 6 years of progress, and I was like, this is very impressive. And I just remember, the first week and a half that I was in China, 2 weeks, I met a guy from Enter China, and he was taking me around the city, and I was just going to a bunch of markets, and I was even just picking spots on the subway and just being, I'm gonna go to that stop and see what's there, and I'll just come across like, oh, this is the drone market, like this is whatever, and it was just mind expanding, like when you go to these places and you see like 1,000 stores that are all selling the same product. It's like, you know, first of all, it's exciting, but it's also overwhelming. And I think the Canton Fair was around the time when I came down. So I went to the Canton Fair and I was like, okay, oh my God, I could sell this, I could make this product. I was like, yeah, so it was kind of like being a kid in a candy store and then realizing like I need to narrow down my focus.
Right. So, I mean, it's like you land here and you're all excited, but did you have like a legitimate plan? Because I was just, in my last video, I was explaining how like I came out here and actually didn't know what I was going to do, but I just like wanted to do something. And I think a lot of people who are watching probably want to do entrepreneurship, but they don't know where to start, or they don't know what their passion is or what they want to do. So like maybe walk us through like what you were actually doing to make money, and what like the lead up until you actually got involved in
into the business. Yeah, I think I just thought at the beginning is, even if you have a plan, China has a way of completely, you know, deconstructing your plan, and the timeline that you had is not going to work. Like, it's going to take longer, it's going to be more difficult. You might even just realize that your plan wasn't really practical. So for me, my plan was, one, to leverage the Enter China community to meet people that were, you know, sourcing products, launching Kickstarter campaigns, learn from them, because my end goal was to do my own crowdfunding campaign. And then the other thing was I wanted to take over my mom's operations here. So I told my mom, I was like, look, I'm going to be in China, like, you don't have to come here anymore. I'm going to manage your, like, your suppliers, all the stuff. And then I wanted to like expand my mom's business. But very early on, I realized, like, one, when somebody's been running a company for 15 years, like, they have their own way of doing things, and I had a different vision, so I kind of dropped that idea. And then two, with the Kickstarter thing, I just didn't have any knowledge of how to launch a crowdfunding campaign, and I realized that it's way more expensive than you think. So like, if you were to launch a typical crowdfunding campaign with a product that is being developed from scratch, you need like $5,000 to $10,000 before you launch.
Yeah. So
that was something that when I met Mike, my business partner. I was explaining to him like, yeah, this is what I want to do, and he was like, do you have $5,000 like to launch a crowdfunding campaign? I was like, no, I don't. So I was like, I'm just gonna go back to teach English. So yeah, anyways, I'd saved up a little bit of money before I came. I'd saved about maybe 3 to 4 months worth of living expenses. And then I started teaching English to supplement my income. I was teaching English full-time for an extended period of time, making quite a decent amount of money, and didn't have any crazy expenses. So during that time period, I was just kind of like, because I dropped my mom's business thing, and then I realized that the crowdfunding thing wasn't realistic. So now I was like I was a little bit lost. I was like, what am I gonna do? But just being here, being constantly surrounded by people doing cool things and meeting a lot of entrepreneurs with ideas, and then even my business partner, when I met him, it wasn't like, hey, you know, let's be business partners. It was like I was introduced to him through Nick from EC. I didn't know at the time that my business partner was looking to restart his sourcing company. So we met just on like, oh hey, I'm Mike and I've been in China for 7 years. I have a lot of experience. You're a new kid. I'd love to like hang out with you and kind of see what you're up to. And that was it. And then we hung out for 3 months, and then he started to talk about, you know, partnering. So that was kind of the trajectory.
And now you've been running Source Find Asia for how long?
I guess we officially launched, I want to say April or May 2015. So we're going on 3 years in the next couple of months.
Cool.
Yeah.
So another thing is like, everyone, not everyone, but lots of people say like, follow your passion or do what you love. And what I've found is like, when I was in my New York job, like sitting at my office thinking about what I should do, I wasn't like, I should sell products on Amazon. Because like, first of all, I didn't even know what I didn't know you could sell products on Amazon. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know anything about drop shipping or product development. But like through the process of being out here, like those things have become my passion, like the process of branding a product, talking with the suppliers and like coordinating everything. So maybe talk about like how the process of sourcing has become passionate for you.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes people make when they're starting entrepreneurship is they think they need to be following their passion project. Like from day one, it's like you have to earn your passion. For me, luckily, I've always been interested in business processes. Like just again, because my parents were entrepreneurs, I always just found the managing of the business to be interesting. So when I started doing the sourcing thing, I was like, well, I wasn't passionate about sourcing, but I was passionate about running a company. So from day one, I approached my sourcing business like any other business. I was like, okay, how do I systemize this? How do I improve the communication between clients and manufacturers? What are the issues that people face when they're approaching manufacturing in China? Whether it's mostly transparency, it's mostly communication. So it's like, how do I make things more transparent? And that's where I started coming up with ideas of like, okay, I'm going to have my clients communicate directly with the factories. I'm going to charge a consulting fee rather than charge a additional cost on your per unit cost, because then there's no conflict of interest for me. Like I'm focused on making sure that my client is happy, not finishing the project so I can get paid. Right. So there's all those things. And then when you start to approach a business like that, seeing the systems and the processes work, whether it's starting a podcast and seeing us start to get inquiries from the podcast. Of course, I love entrepreneurship, but I would love to do a podcast that's just completely like about lifestyle and just have random topics all the time. But I know that my target demographic wants to hear about crowdfunding, manufacturing, business in China. So that's what my focus is. And it's like slowly but surely you see that working and you start to become more passionate about the company. And then of course, as you learn more, as you become more of an expert and you kind of figure out the game. Because again, like being in China, a lot of times people think it's murky and it's mysterious, and they sometimes feel like the factories are out to cheat them. And then you learn like it's not like that. Like there's a system to this, there's a process to this, and you have to adapt to the market. You have to adapt to China. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting when you're on the other side, where now I see my clients, or I see potential clients act pretty paranoid towards Chinese manufacturers. And then I also see the manufacturers get frustrated with the clients. So like for me, like that is a puzzle that I'm always trying to figure out, and I've become more passionate about that process. So yeah, I think the most important thing is just approaching whatever business you approach. Just forget about it being a passion business. Be passionate about the processes in running a company. Yeah,
I think just to piggyback on that, like I think whatever you get into, you have to put in enough time to actually get results before you can start to get passionate about something. Because a lot of times I think people try something and it doesn't work so fast, and they either give up or they move on to something else. I think a lot of entrepreneurs have like the shiny object syndrome. Which is like, you find an opportunity, you jump on it, it might not work out the way you wanted it to, so you jump to something else. And something important that you pointed out is that you really gotta put in the time and the effort until you can see a little growth, and that kind of makes it more addicting, and like you just keep working at it.
Yeah, it's like our podcast. I think we started off with obviously 0 subscribers, but it took us maybe 4 or 5 months before we saw any sort of inquiries directly from the podcast. So it's like during that 3-4 months, I was still releasing an episode every week, and I was like, eventually it's gonna work, but I had to stick with it. Same thing. same thing with the actual business. The first 6 months of the company, we weren't making that much money. Like I was still teaching English part-time to supplement my living expenses. And I was only able to quit teaching English about 6 months into the business. Going back to your point about getting the Chinese object syndrome, Nick Ramil, who's a partner at Brink and partner in Enter China, he told me this because I had the same issue, but in a different way. Like when I started the sourcing company, I saw these opportunities to help people launch crowdfunding campaigns because Mike has experience launching a couple campaigns, and we were like, oh, this could be an alternative revenue stream from the sourcing. And Nick was just like, dude, like, again, same thing that one of the mistakes that entrepreneurs make is you start making money from this business, and then now you start thinking, how do I jump into alternative revenue streams when you haven't systemized and grown and become an expert in this particular field. Right. So that's another mistake that people make very early on is instead of focusing and if it's Amazon, building a brand within, building other products within a brand, instead you want to jump around and be like, okay, I could sell this and make a bunch of money quickly. It's like, like long-term play. Build a brand, long-term play, become an expert in your field. Mm-hmm. Then you can jump into alternative revenue streams. It's going to take longer, but the long-term benefits are much better.
Absolutely, I agree. Can you give us one crazy story or experience about your business or something that happened in your business or something relevant to China that you've had out here? Yeah, sorry guys, the camera just cut out, but back to Rico's story, something crazy that happened in China.
It's so many stories. Okay, just one real quick thing about our old office. In the bathroom, first of all, everybody smokes in China. This is the first thing.
Yeah, that's great.
There was no smoking signs in the entire building. No smoking everywhere. The bathroom has literally posters that say no smoking. I walk into the bathroom, guess what? You find people smoking, ashing their cigarettes on the no smoking sign, just like zero fucks given. There's another time I walked into the washroom and I opened up the stall. And I find this dude in the squat position on the toilet. Like, this is a normal toilet. This is a sit-down toilet. And he's in the squat position on the toilet with his pants on, smoking a cigarette. He's playing on his phone. And I just looked at him, and I just closed the door slowly. I was like, why didn't you at least lock the freaking stall, man? But to me, that is just like a very typical...
The epitome of China.
Yeah, like it's just...
This is more normal.
We're in this fancy office building in downtown, and then you have dudes just not giving a fuck about... Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that was part of the reason why I left that office, was just... Like, I could see the quality of the office going just down as I was there, yeah.
We could talk about that for hours. But the last question I want to ask you is like, what advice would you give somebody who was in your shoes maybe 3 years ago before you came out here, somebody who was interested in entrepreneurship or wants to work for themselves or be their own boss? Like, what kind of advice could you give them?
I'd say just take the leap, man, and lower your expectations, because I think a lot of people think like, oh, I want to make $500,000 in a year or whatever. It's like, no, just make smaller goals and try to aim towards it. So like for me, when I first started the company, my goal was like to make $100 from a client, and my first client was like $1,000. So it's like, but I would have been very happy making $100, and you just have to set lower expectations, and when you hit that 100, then you set a higher expectation. You kind of go from there. I think when it comes to getting out of your situation, if you're thinking about it, like there's very clear examples like me, like Harrison, where I didn't have any money when I came here. I'd saved up like $2,000, and then there's ways around getting around the financial thing, whether it's teaching English. You might have to sacrifice your ego by teaching English for an extended period of time, or moving to a place that's really cheap. Like Guangzhou is slightly more expensive because it's a bigger city. You can be outside of Guangzhou. So just take the leap, man. Take the leap, because there's so many ways that you can get around the financial stuff, the emotional stuff, getting into a good network of people that can help you, progress faster. So take the leap.
100%. Yeah, the last video I touched on that, like, when you're put in extreme situations, you find ways to make it work. And that's kind of what entrepreneurship is all about. Like, you do have to take a risk.
Yeah.
But with high risk comes high reward. So that's kind of the game that we're playing.
Like Gary Vee says, you're gonna die. You're gonna fucking die.
Three words to motivate me. You will die.
You're gonna fucking die. It's true, man. Like you gotta think about that shit.
That's funny. All right, guys. That's all we have for today. I don't want to make this like a 30-minute video. I'm gonna link Rico's business in the description and his YouTube channel. He has a podcast, Made in China. Definitely check out all that stuff. It's awesome. And I hope you guys liked this video. I hope it was valuable. I want to hear from you. I want to hear what your thoughts about this video and what you want to see in the future. So hit the thumbs up button, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.